I am here today with Jesse Damiani, an old friend, actually somebody who I interviewed probably more than 8 years ago. I had you on the Millennials Don't Suck podcast. Very grateful for a much awaited part two of that conversation. I think the topics are a little different today, but thanks for joining me today, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Before we kind of get into the meat here, maybe just tell us briefly about who you are, your background, how you've wound this path into where you are today.
Yeah, so my background, I can pretty comfortably say, is probably rarer on the tech side. I got an MFA in poetry, and my professors were very kind to give me the tough love advice of figuring out what I should do for work over and above trying to pursue that creative craft. And so that I had already worked since high school as a journalist. Back in the day, I was writing like monthly recaps of what happened at my high school for the
Mhm.
for the local newspaper. And then in college worked as the news editor for the newspaper there. And in grad school, I started to cover culture, media, and then ultimately some technology topics. And but that was still kind of like a sub point in my trajectory. But then after grad school, moved to Los Angeles, thinking I wanted to try to become a screenwriter. Ended up working as an entertainment copywriter, so somebody who writes movie trailers, TV spots, stuff like that. But the important thing that happened at the time was I was introduced to the early virtual reality community that had really sprung up in 2014. And so, fast forward, I as like a humanities person in this like more predominantly tech space, got it in my head that I wanted to develop a startup that its product was a screenwriting and project management tool for immersive stories. That didn't end up working out, but it brought me to a startup accelerator in Silicon Valley called Boost VC, which was focused on, yeah, emerging technologies. So I was around a lot of blockchain companies, AI companies, and this was early 2017. So AI wasn't something that people were talking about as much publicly. That was very appealing to me. But what people were talking about a lot at that time was blockchain. So as it relates to thinking about trust and safety, those conversations were really kind of front and center in my mind at that time. And yeah, that's the kind of like jump off point for sort of my exposure to technology and parlayed that into, yeah, covering emerging technologies on Forbes. And, the wonderful thing about working as a journalist is you're constantly learning. And so just swimming around in these different waters and kind of drinking through the fire hose. And these days, I work as a curator of new media art. I'm a writer, and I also, on the side, teach about art and AI at USC.
Incredible. As somebody who also, I would say, has a relatively non-traditional background in technology, having studied foreign policy, I really relate to a lot of sort of just the following your nose and following your curiosity and building a life around that curiosity. So very admirable. And yeah, just really grateful to see you, man, have you here. I'm curious, you mentioned AI in 2017. Obviously, we've seen it proliferate in the last, let's say, 18 months. Did you did you anticipate the eventual proliferation in the way that's happened? Or when ChatGPT and all that, when that kind of exploded, did that catch you by surprise?
I want to answer this question thoughtfully.
Yeah.
So, yes, I anticipated it, but I don't think I was unique in that. I think
Yeah.
anybody who is exposed to even the current state at that time of machine learning could see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And for me, the framing around existential risk and, the singularity and thinking about like this progression from narrow to general to super intelligence, those were very grabby and captivating to me at that time as somebody who had this background in writing and narrative. What's changed now is that I actually think that that framing is not necessarily productive for us coming to meaningful solutions or like collective decisions around what we do about this technology and the capabilities of this technology. So I guess jumping to the ChatGPT part, I wasn't actually surprised at all, but also my position there was like I was distinctly aware of what was happening with Transformers because as early as 2018, I was thinking about how could I create spawned like versions, like bots that could produce poetry in my voice. And
Hmm.
so I was already kind of conceptually pursuing like what that would look like. And I'm not a developer. And so I was interacting with folks who I recognized had that skill, And this was like the early moments of GPT-2. And even what GPT-2 could do relative to like a Markov chain was already a quantum leap. It's just that most people weren't seeing it. The kind of big eye-open moment for me was the GPT-3 playground. And I believe that was either late 2019 or early 2020. And that was when it was like, like the level of sustained sense that you could achieve with a language model at that time was really, really striking to me. So by the time ChatGPT came out, actually the real innovation of ChatGPT is the UI.
Right.
Like building this chat interface that makes it easy for anybody to just interact. Because the playground is cool, but it's sort of confusing when you first get in there. You're like, what am I supposed to do here? You're not necessarily like talking to anything. You're just typing and seeing, and then you realize like, oh, I can facilitate a chat style conversation if I want to, but it's more like a back and forth autocomplete where you're like you and not the bot obviously, but you and the language model are kind of auto completing each other in a sort of like text fever dream. So ChatGPT, yeah, was novel because it had such a clean interface. And I think that was the moment, of course, that the public woke up to the possibilities, which every time the public wakes up to a new technology or a new set of practices, that's a hyper object because now like where it used to be a very narrow slice of the population that's paying any attention to something and like starting to do that speculative work of like, oh, what about this? And what about this? Like when you're in that narrow slice territory, it's fun and you know all the people and like, but you're nowhere near the open expanse of possibilities that actually exist when lots of people start thinking about it. So the wake of ChatGPT was just sort of wild to witness because we were seeing, you know,
Yeah, it
the
was a new conceptualization of what's possible being born.
how did you just if I could jump in,
Yeah.
how did you encounter as somebody who's been, you know, working adjacent to and in technology and doing
Yeah.
sort of media work sort of related, like what was your experience of the ChatGPT moment?
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, I think I was definitely aware of the Transformer paper. I was aware of like, okay, this is gonna be crazy at some point. I remember being on Reddit, I would say maybe 2018, maybe early 2019, when people were starting to like post Reddit comments as GPT-2 or as and then as GPT-3. And I think it was like when yeah, it must have been GPT-3 when I started to see Reddit comments of just like, oh, you can't tell the difference between a person and this, it really started to kind of turn my, I think obviously, you knew about what I'm working on with Kibu, like it started to turn my brain onto the sort of the eventuality of it's going to be really important at some point to be able to know who's a real person
Yeah.
and or not because like I can't tell and this is like we're early days here and I already like if I saw this in a comment of like user Jimbo 1742 like I would just think that's a dude and so yeah I mean well then similar I mean I think you talked about the innovation of the chat interface like being able to just ask a question or say something and get an essay back. I think it does. I've thought often in the past about this, like this is magic. This is like wizardry. It's like we're summoning something from some other place almost. And that's kind of almost what it felt like. It's like we're bringing this sort of other intelligence into our world. And certainly, I think I've been simultaneously like so excited. I use Midjourney. I have fun with I was kind of an early adopter of Midjourney. I use GPT-4 pretty regularly to, ask questions, help me analyze things. Like I'm a user and I'm also obviously thinking about it from a security paradigm, I'm pretty terrified of what's coming down the pike because I think we already saw it in 2020, right? With trust and misinformation. And we're seeing it even today with a lot of the social stuff happening. I see having some sort of objective truth as being civilizationally important. And
Mm,
I think we're just like inching closer and closer to the line of not being able to have that.
mm,
And I think like AI and whether it's voice cloning or whether it's deep fakes or whether it's all the different sort of buckets that AI unlocks, I really see it as both really exciting but also really scary,
Mm.
for humanity and sort of the networks that bind us together. I'm curious, you've been in this world, you talked about thinking about trust and safety back in like 2017, 2018. Is there a part of kind of the current paradigm that you find most frustrating around, security, trust, whether in the context of AI or just kind of more generally around blockchain, stuff like that?
Mm. I mean, I think my answer to that is aligned with your vision with Kibu, which is that we have collectively people have a tendency, and some of this obviously is bolstered by narratives of the powerful, that technology is a solution to X. And that if technology creates a new byproduct problem, there will be a technology to solve that. That whole way of thinking is incorrect, just on its face. It's not to say that technologies can't be used in the development of solutions to problems. But if it's a social problem, then we need social solutions.
Yeah.
And if technology is in service to a social solution, that's when I think we get it. We step into the domain of actually possibly solving a social ill. So when I think about a lot of the discourse around privacy, security, trust, and safety, a lot of it jumps to, okay, well, technology is introducing all these new problems. And it's like, well, let's rewind for a second. Like, we've had disinformation for a long time. We've had disinformation long before the advent of the internet. The problem is not the human inclination to either, accidentally or like sort of unwittingly perpetuate misinformation or actively propagandistically deploy disinformation. Those are old problems that maybe were not urgent enough at mass scale, or maybe the populace didn't have the agency relative to the power structures to address meaningfully. But we are now in a context where so much information is spread algorithmically that it is kind of, to your point, I don't know that I necessarily agree on the term objective reality, but I agree with the point that you're making in the sense that we need a heuristic or a rubric by which we can come to consensus about the things that happen in space time. And
Fair. I
yeah,
hear what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so coming together collectively to try to think about those things, I think is hugely important. But the kind of like, the sky is falling, like we can have deep fakes now, like I think that takes us away from those considerations. I appreciate that platforms are now trying to ask anybody uploading content, is this synthetic, is this doctored, et cetera. That's a necessary step. But I think the kind of whack-a-mole game of trying to squash bots
Yeah.
is a noble one, but one that is inevitably imperfect.
Right. It's an
So
arms race.
it's exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so having methods by which we can reliably interact with each other in a technological context feels like a way of rerouting that thinking. And it's also more accessible to people's, like, trying to kind of get into the abstractions of technology is bewildering to people. And it's often convenient for companies to like let those stereotypes either self-perpetuate or even sort of further, like add fuel to that fire, because it still situates them as the arbiters of like, oh, these are the solutions we need, and these are the regulations we need. And like, there's no way you could ever understand this. Trust us, the benevolent overlords. So anyway, like when I'm thinking about that side of the equation, yeah, I think like a renewed interest and focus on how do we collectively and socially make determinations about how we, spread information, validate identity, you know, yada yada yada. On the kind of phishing, ransomware, malware side, people are talking about this, so I'm not saying this oppositionally, but like I almost wish there were some mandatory class like in at the advent of 2025 that everybody
Yeah.
had to take
Like
about
home ec or
basic.
something. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
like literally, like, yeah, because some of the things that I've been seeing are, it's not that they're so sophisticated, it's that they're like any good malware that can be delivered at scale, it's just sophisticated enough. And voice cloning tools are just sophisticated enough,
Yeah.
And capturing people's anxiety and getting them to make bad choices right in those moments is just so easy now. And developing, like, using something like ChatGPT or Claude or any LLM to develop new ideas for ransomware, malware, etc. We're ultimately talking about a kind of endless stream, but it's all scaffolded on people not having like a basic literacy of things to look out for. Like, hey, if somebody's demanding that you log into something quickly because you're in danger, like that's a red flag. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. Like it could actually be a meaningful, correspondence from your bank or whomever, but it's a flag that you should now be on guard. And so things like that, I think it's not that people aren't talking about them, they are, but I think that we all should be talking a lot more about them and really trying to educate, particularly the like technophobic people in our lives.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, to that end, like I know that you are among many other things kind of a trend forecaster. What do you think some of the most important trends that are going to shape safety, identity in the future? Are there, is it more on the technology side? Are there legal decisions or sort of the policy side that you're looking at? Like, if we're thinking about the next few years, what are some of the big moments that you're going to be looking for?
Mm. My general, my temperature check on regulation is like, we'll see a few examples, probably from the EU that like, quote, get it right.
Yeah.
But by and large, because these are global technologies and they are exploitable on a global context,
Well, in the EU, what enforcement ability does the EU have anyway? Like,
totally, totally.
like
I mean, we
actual.
see this even play out with Meta,
Yeah.
like, or, and there's also this like, this jockeying that itself takes years of
Yeah.
like, in a legal gray area, that's still an open window for a bad actor while a regulation is being established. And also, getting back to my earlier point, there was this whole thing with the task force that was just assembled, where
Right.
it's like every major CEO of an AI company. And of course, everybody has something bad to say about that. I mean, not the individual people, of course, but like everybody has something bad to say about the overall list and who they believe was, short shrifted or left out. But you look at something like that and it's like, yeah, of course you're going to have the people who develop the technology, who make the claim that they more than anyone understand the ills that the technology can produce. And it's not a surprise also that a lot of them, whether explicitly or implicitly, are accelerationists. Like
Yeah.
their attitude is let the good guys build the good technology and regulation is just a problem. And they might say, let us help you develop the regulation, which is essentially like a facade of regulation so that, we sort of palliate the masses into believing that they're protected. So I have a pretty dim view of governmental regulation, which is not to say it's very important. And I'm glad that enough governments have woken up to the need to be pursuing this. But we're talking about educating some of these regulators from zero.
Right.
And people spend, from undergrad to PhD to get to a level of even being able to enter a field to have, you know, plausible, effective ideas that would work in practice. So anyway, I'm not sure about that. On the social side, I think a lot of people have, particularly in the wake of the 2016 and 2020 US presidential elections, woken up to the basic idea that a lot of bad can come in even really like mundane, simple platforms. And now AI is being touted as beyond anything you could imagine with those. So I
Yeah.
think there is a general inclination among people to, yeah, collectively come together and find solutions. Is there a particular moment that would signify that something meaningful had emerged? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
I think it could just be kind of one of those situations that's like little by little, things start to shift and there isn't one hinge point,
Yeah.
we'll look back on that it's, oh yeah, this happened and then this happened and this happened and sort of like turning an oil tanker or something like that, where it happens slowly, but eventually you're going in a new direction. I'll kind of wrap up, with asking first for some pessimism and then some optimism. When you think about the next 5, 10, 20 years, what keeps you up at night? What are you afraid of happening?
Well, there's the obvious. Like I'm not alone in saying that we're closer to nuclear exchange than humanity has been in 70 plus years. So that's alarming, but that's also on such an abstract extreme that I think there's more worthwhile things to flag. One is the very basic aspect of kind of getting to your earlier point. What are the means by which we can come to consensus? And what are the means by which we can start to detoxify the information ecosystem? In absence of that, it's essentially every other problem scaffolds, we're a social species. If we can't effectively socialize, and I don't mean in terms of partying, though, of course, partying is a place that people, bond and whatever. But if we can't effectively socialize, if we can't effectively share information and agree on basic precepts, we're in a lot of trouble. And I don't mean to say that we all need to agree on the exact same thing. We can have many disagreements, but rebuilding a good faith, civil, pro-social way of engaging with each other and being transparent about what our heuristic is. Like, what do we use to assert, the truth value of something? So that's, I would say, problem number one that keeps me up at night. I guess to state that as a problem, my fear is that we're past the point where we're able to do that at mass scale, and that we have to do that in local communities, and that the local community level won't succeed. I hope that's not the case, but that is a scary thought to me.
Great.
On the more macro systems level, sort of the thing that, and it's related to the previous, is the future of energy. I think that a lot of assumptions that particularly economists, but everybody makes about what the future will look like are based on an energy reality that I don't believe will be the case. Like, to sort of state it simply, my sense is that energy is going to become much more expensive, and many other problems unfurl from an energy economy that's more expensive than it currently is, ranging from the kind of like supply chain logistics breakdown that we saw a couple years ago, all the way to, displaced populations, social unrest, rising authoritarianism. And part of what keeps me up related to that is that, unlike the information ecosystem problem, which I think most people agree is a problem, they just disagree on how we get to the solution. I don't think a lot of people think of the future of the energy sector in their thinking about the future. And I think it will become the the driver of so much possible unrest.
Hmm. Good answers. Scary answers, but good answers. All right. So, other side of the coin, what's the point if we don't have hope? What gives you hope? What keeps you looking optimistically towards the future? Are there particular projects? Are there particular people, ideas that you feel like as they proliferate and grow can help us pull ourselves out of the hole, so to speak?
Well, the going idea with particularly the fast development of AI, but I think it holds with any technology, is that as machines are more and more able to solve problems, it becomes more and more incumbent on people to ask good questions. And I do think we live in a time with a lot of really thoughtful question askers. And I also think that we now have a set of tools that are imagination enabling, or
Mhm.
imagination fuel. And this cuts both ways. So yes, I recognize that all the college kids writing their, or high school students writing their 5 paragraph essays with ChatGPT is like not helping them learn how to develop the sort of
Right.
way of composing their thoughts. So there's that, and we need to figure that out. But the flip side of that is that there are so many things people don't do because they don't have the technical capability to do it. And now with, they're called foundation models, I think aptly. Like, they form not only a solid foundation, but a liquid foundation where they fill the various gaps where you might not have technical capability.
I love
And
that. I love that. Yeah.
tell me what that kicks up for you.
Well, I just had the visual of sort of almost like Quickcrete or something, like finding the cracks and filling the cracks in. And I had never thought about a model in that way before. And yeah, that's feels perfect.
So yeah, I think there is a lot of imaginative possibility, particularly with generative tools, but a lot of tech products that exist now.
Yeah.
And so we do live in this time where we do still have some amount of energy abundance, and where the impacts of climate change and erratic weather and all of this are, let's put it this way, not as bad as they will be.
Yeah.
And so this is a time in my mind for this kind of collective visioning, thinking about best practices. It's hard to make people think of something as an emergency if it doesn't feel like an emergency in their daily life. And I think that is in many ways just how it's going to be, which is why it becomes even more important now to start essentially doing the prep work of all this fun imagining that we're able to do. And
Mm.
so, I think about the possibilities of speculative fiction. I think about the possibilities of developing really thoughtful products. Like there's all these little places that give me hope and yeah, make me excited about what is ultimately possible.
Beautiful. I can't think of a better way to end on what is ultimately possible. So I'm really grateful for the time, brother. Always good to see your face.
Likewise.
We'll keep an eye out. Tell us your podcast, everything else you're up to. Where can people find you?
Sure. My podcast is called Urgent Futures. So that's at Urgent Futures on YouTube. And I have a newsletter, which also pushes out the podcasts called Reality Studies. One thing
Awesome.
actually that I wanted to bring up that you've now just reminded me, I did an interview, it's not out yet, but it will be out with Dennis E. Tenon, who wrote a book called Literary Theory for Robots.
Mm,
And he describes all technology as social coordination. It's just asynchronous social coordination, and
cool.
we like to get really geeked about a particular technology, but like there's so many like examples we think of as boring, like a dictionary is an incredible technology for extending knowledge and social coordination, and that framing has been really productive in my mind for conversations like this. So um,
Cool.
that podcast is forthcoming.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link to it in, in the show notes and pass it on to folks. Dude, always a pleasure. You're a legend.
Oh,
Grateful,
thanks for
grateful
having me.
for your time and your beautiful brain, and I hope to see you soon.
Likewise, thank you again.
Thanks, man.